Hi, Jillian.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing wonderful. How are you?
Good, thank you. I actually just
Good.
had a little bit of a low blood sugar before actually starting. I was like, "Oh, it's like the perfect time."
Good thing you caught it before, not like during, where you're like, oh no.
Uh-huh, yes.
Except this is the best podcast to have that on because I'd be like, oh, just
Yeah,
go.
exactly. I thought it was so fitting, and then, because I teach, I always have glucose tabs on me, and they're just, like, always, like, just within reach because sometimes you're, like, teaching or doing something and you just need to, like, pop them in.
I feel that. Yes. So, where are you calling in from?
From Michigan. Yep, and right now I'm at school, so just ended the school day. And yeah, I live in Michigan and I've been here for about 7 years, originally from New York.
Oh, wow.
So,
Okay. What made you go
yeah.
to Michigan?
So I have family out here. And then after school I got a job out here and then my life just kind of like blossomed here and I love it.
Yeah, I'm from Ohio originally, and
Oh, okay.
I lived in Ann Arbor actually for a little bit for like an
Oh,
internship, and
yeah.
I loved
Okay.
it. I loved it. It was
Yeah,
great.
it's a beautiful state. I think it's very underrated because everyone always just assumes like one part makes up all of Michigan. I'm like, no, we have the Great Lakes. I'm a scuba diver. So like I've seen the beauty of all of Michigan.
Yes, no, Michigan is great, and you're right. It's a lot better,
Yeah.
I think, than people think it is.
Yes.
So, what do you do for fun?
So, oh my God, I feel like that's such it's such a loaded question. So when I'm not at school, we live on a lake, so we're like big boating people. I haven't really got into the wakeboarding or skiing, but we're boaters. We love paddle boarding, kayaking. My husband actually like got us into climbing. So every winter we go ice climbing, which is like insane to like even think about until you like actually do it. And you're like, oh wow, I can do this. Yeah, and then
Where do you
we're
go
also
ice climbing at?
so we have a couple of national parks here in Michigan. We have Pictured Rocks National Park, and the waterfalls freeze in the winter because it's like so cold up in northern Michigan. And yeah, and it's like wild. Like you can actually climb the waterfalls, and people don't actually like realize like that's a thing.
I had no
So
idea.
and I can't get very high, but like I try it every single year and I give it a go. So yeah, then we're both certified scuba divers. So yeah, I feel like everything with diabetes is always like there's always a learning. You always have to like learn about, I feel like everything. And then you're also like relearning yourself with diabetes when it comes to doing like even just like activities in itself because you never know how your blood sugar is going to be, especially like underwater.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's just,
that's awesome. Good for you. I love all the activities you do. These are like not typical activities. I love it. It's great.
I know I forget sometimes. I'm like, yeah, it's probably not like the norm. But yeah, then, bicycle riding and traveling. So
Yeah,
yeah, a mix of everything.
all of the above. I love it.
Yeah.
So, tell us more about your type 1 diabetes diagnosis.
So I was diagnosed, oh my God, I feel like it's been so long now, 29 years ago. I was 8 years old. And my brother and I are actually both living with type 1 diabetes, and we're a year apart and we're diagnosed 1 year apart. And I just remember it's like the craziest thing because our diagnosis stories were just so different. Back in like the mid 90s, later 90s, diabetes wasn't really talked about. And there was like nothing really out there, especially with type 1 diabetes. So my brother, he was like so lethargic and always drinking water and laying around. And then he urinated the bed. And then he was a little too, like a little older for that. So one day we were helping some friends move and he just passed out. So he was rushed to the hospital and actually, he wasn't diagnosed with type 1 diabetes right away. It took a little bit. The doctors came back and they're like, oh, he has some sort of like flu. And my mom's like, no, it's not the flu. So they did some more tests and they came back. They're like, oh, your son has type 1 diabetes. So it was like he was like 5 minutes from like death. His blood sugars were just off the chart, unreadable. And then because we knew his symptoms, When I was starting to experience them, like the following summer, I was actually visiting my dad here in Michigan, and they brought me to the hospital right away, and I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. So it's been a ride. It's wild. Sometimes you hear siblings or family members that have type 1. But before my brother and I had type 1, no one in our family had type 1, even type 2. There was no family history whatsoever. And then we both got it.
That is so crazy you both got it, especially that close. So was he also 8 when he got his?
Yeah, it was like 8 or 9 or 7 and 8. It's just like everything is like such a blur. And I feel like my whole life has been diabetes because I don't really him and I both don't really remember too much about like, remember like life before because we've been living with it now for like 28, 29 years. So I feel like it's all that I've ever known. And ironically, like I was at my sister's house yesterday for the Lions game, and somebody that I've actually known for like a couple years, we were talking, and it turned out he had type 1 diabetes. I'm like, how did I not know this? And he's like, here's my pump, here's my CGM. And I'm like, but wait, I've known you. How have I not like known you live with also type 1? So sometimes it's just like, there's so many people around us living with type 1 diabetes. And sometimes we just don't even like realize it, even like people like in our circle.
Yeah, that's so wild. Well, I mean, it's not good that your brother has type 1 too, but it must have been so nice growing up with somebody that understood what you were going through.
It was. I always say like this is kind of like it's ironic when he used to, because back in like the mid later 90s, you did not have CGMs, you didn't have insulin pumps. We were mixing different insulins together. We were on like what was it like NPH, and then there was R and H or whatever they were, and you had to like manually prick your finger like 8 times a day. So I remember he was like poking he was doing his blood sugar. And I just remember sitting at the table, and he's like, do you want to do it? And I'm always like, no, not today, not today. And then finally I'm like, if I ever had to do that, I would die. And then it was like the following year I got diagnosed, and here I am today.
My gosh. Do you have any other siblings or is it just you two?
Yeah, it's my brother and I, and then my father got remarried, and they had 3 children. But so far, they're fine. I should, it's like funny because as a patient advocate, I'm always like advocating, sharing resources, and I was like, you know what? I don't even know if my own siblings, if they were ever really through trial and that, or just throughout life, if they ever really got tested.
Yeah. I don't know if this is true, but I've heard that like both parents have to have the autoimmune gene in their body for a kid to get it. I don't know if that's true because I'm like, well, I don't know. It doesn't seem right, but
Yeah, it's just like it's also there's so many different variables. Like you hear of people like before the vaccine, my brother and I both had chickenpox, and then there's people that are out there like, oh, there was like a big group of you that had chickenpox, and soon after you got type 1, or people that had the flu, something was maybe triggered, or people even saying like COVID now could maybe trigger different things. So there's just so many possibilities of like where it can come from. But yeah, it'll always be like the greatest mystery.
it's so sad. It's so unfortunate. I was actually a COVID diagnosis, so I wasn't
Oh,
diagnosed that long
yeah.
ago.
Okay. Yeah.
And I know a lot of people who have came from like the
God.
COVID diagnosis, which is really sad. And it's only
Yeah.
getting worse, is what I hear. So it's not great, but
I think it's hard too because people like, oh my God, you lived with it for like so long. How do you do it? And I'm like, to be honest, I was a kid and things were different. And technology has evolved and education has evolved. But I actually feel bad for people that are just older and weren't a kid because I've lived with it, and that's all I know. But people that are just getting it, they're like, oh my God, oh my gosh. And there's just so many changes and adjustments, I feel like a little bit, when you get it like later in life.
there
So,
it is. Yes, I feel like so it's been almost 3 years for me, and I feel like I'm still figuring things out. But
I
yeah, it
yeah.
is what it is. You don't have a choice, so you just have to figure it out.
Yeah, that's how I feel like even now, like, I feel like I'm definitely like a pro at it, but you're always learning something. And I feel like there's just like all like it's kind of like diabetes is like a gateway. and there's like, you never know kind of which which other doors are going to open. And I'm actually pregnant right now. I'm 25 weeks pregnant, and that was like the biggest learning curve, like navigating diabetes and type 1 pregnant. Like I call it type 1 pregnancy because once again, my body is changing. My insulin needs change on a weekly basis. So that's like a lot. It's a lot, but so
Congratulations,
good.
by the
Thank you.
way. That's so exciting. And if you don't mind me asking, what was it
Sure.
planned? Like, were you able to?
Yes.
Okay, so you were able to like get your blood sugars in control before.
Yeah, and like, this is like one of the biggest questions I've like received, and I always say this is a very loaded question. So when I tell people when they're like, "Oh, with diabetes," because I feel like taking like a step back, I feel like throughout my life, I've always wanted a family, and I'm 35. When I deliver, I'll be 36. So I'm a little bit, I'm high risk, and then you have like the age on top of it a little bit. But I feel like it's almost like the preparing is takes longer sometimes and even just like conceiving. So when I tell people, yeah, it took 2 months and here we are with, 25 weeks later, with our baby, and people are like, "Oh, like 2 months. Like how?" And I was like, "Well, I when I was a teenager, I had an A1C of 15 to 16. It was off the charts because as most young adults, we just kind of live in denial sometimes with having type 1. And some of us go through like a little rebellious stage. So, after experiencing like that and also being in DKA a couple times throughout life, that's when I really decided to like transform my life and my health. So I worked on my A1C for years, and then I got the Dexcom, then I got the tandem pump, and now I'm on Control IQ. And it's I know, technically can't really say this, but it's been so life-saving for me. And then that way I was seeing my A1Cs just go like that. It was just like that. It was amazing with like having your blood sugars and your insulin just so well tailored to like your body and its needs. As soon as you get your settings correct, I feel like you're going to just like kind of cruise. So my A1C, I got it down. It was like dropping. It was going from like, from 15 to 16. And now then it was like eights for a bit, sevens. And then for the last 4 or 5 years, I've been in like the sixes. So when I got married, I was like, okay, we want to have kids right away. We've been together for so long. I'm a little bit older now. So I planned about a year out to have that talk with my doctor to be like, hey, I'm getting married here. We would like to soon plan. And so I had to kind of go through getting my body like pregnancy ready to even like kind of have that green light to even, start trying for a family. So I planned about a year out, and my endo was like, okay, your A1Cs are in range. You have the green light. Let's check your labs. And then she noticed my thyroid level. It wasn't high by any means, but she wanted it a little bit tighter. So it was like creeping up, but it was so minimal. But she's like, that can make a difference with pregnancy. So I got on Synthroid, and then I was taking my prenatals. So, like I said, it's not just like, oh, 2 months. How did you do it? It was just the planning, and just preparing yourself with diabetes. So, you're not risking complications and complications for just not only myself, but also for the baby, because you hear of so many things that, with uncontrolled blood sugars in pregnancy, that there could be some things that may not be positive. But yeah, so I'm sorry, like going back, I feel like I'm like, woo, but I feel like we've been told our whole life, or at least I have in reading and hearing it, like it's gonna be so hard as a type 1 to like have kids or conceive. And I think about that and I'm like, wow, you hear this and you have this ingrained in your head. But at the end of the day, for me, it did take 2 months, which was like pretty quick, but it's also, like I said, just a process.
Right. And unfortunately, as type ones, we do have to do that planning ahead of time. But the great news is you
Yeah.
can get pregnant, you can have a baby. So we just have to do what we have
Yeah,
to do to get in a good spot.
exactly. It's like for me, it's like type 1, I have the age, I'm, 35. So there's a lot of factors, and each week it's truly so different with like diabetes management and keeping your blood sugars and A1C so controlled. I get my A1C done every month. I get my labs done every month. And of course, like like the countless appointments.
Oh yes. So you said you're on Tandem Control IQ.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
how is that working out for you with the pregnancy?
I feel like it's just been my saving grace having diabetes technology. I'm not sure if I think having any technology, like you're already ahead of the curve because everything is so synced now where it's so tailored. When your blood sugars are climbing up, you automatically get that correction insulin. And the minute you're dropping, it cuts off your insulin for a little bit. So I feel like that has helped so much. And I know like there's also people out there that actually go through like insulin resistance. I haven't hit that stage yet. So I know like, some people say around 25 weeks and later, sometimes insulin resistance is going to be like, it may hit, but I haven't experienced that yet. So far, everything is going well with my pump, well with Control IQ. I was able to keep it on. My endo was like happy with Control IQ being on. I know like some people say, oh, I had to turn mine off. And I'm like, yes, but don't forget your diabetes is so different than mine. And you're going to experience things maybe different at different times than I will. And maybe I might not experience them at all. So I feel like we all have to kind of go into pregnancy and navigating it, learning as much as we can, but also keeping an open mind where we may not experience everything that you read out there.
Right, right. And I saw you post on Instagram, your A1C right now is super low. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's been fives for a little bit, and I'm one of those that I post everything. So when I have a high blood sugar, like everyone's going to hear about it. When I have a low blood sugar, and then like everything in between, because there's no such thing as perfect. Even during pregnancy, even with a 5% A1C, it doesn't mean that I am in range 100% of time. It's just, I think it's also about, when you do have a little bit of a spike, it's like catching it early. So you don't spike and you're not high for an extended periods of time. You're catching it, you're making sure it's being corrected. And then, and I think that's important because people, sometimes on social media, everyone just posts the good and the pretty, and that's not reality, especially with like being a type 1 and being pregnant. There's just no such thing as perfect.
No, there's a lot of factors, hormones, lot
Yeah,
of stuff
yeah.
happening.
But I think it's also good accountability, especially when you're pregnant. It kind of like there's a lot of pros to it as much as there's we are high risk and we do go to a lot of appointments and our control has to be pretty tight. But I think at the same time, it kind of like sets you up to win because when you get your A1Cs like monthly, you're like, oh man, 5, this is great. Let's see if I can continue it or even, go lower. But I've been 5 now since my entire pregnancy. I can't really like, I'm not fluctuating too much with that. But I feel like it's good. And you know how it is like going to your endo every 3 months and getting an A1C. Sometimes you slip a little bit and you're like, oh, the next time I'll, fix it or do better. But now when it's monthly, you're just like, oh, what's my next A1C? Because it becomes so addicting being in range and, seeing that 5.
Plus, when like you have a living human being inside of you, it gives you like a little bit
Yes,
more motivation, I would say. If you get a high blood
100%.
sugar, you're like, oh my God, like there's something inside me I have to take care of. Like,
Yes, because yeah, like you said, it's like not just you anymore because losing control of that management could just mean it just open up another floodgate to other things.
are
But
you
yeah,
following a specific diet?
no, zero.
Good.
Everyone,
That's
yeah, that's the other
great.
one. Like, oh my God, you must eat like no carbs. I'm like, no, I eat like 5 or 6 snacks a day. And it's just about, I think if you're so diligent with bolusing, Pre-bolusing can sometimes be hard during pregnancy because early on I had really bad nausea and I was vomiting like 8 to 10 times a day. And that actually put me into the hospital. I went to the ER because I was like, okay, my blood sugars are perfect, which is like insane. They weren't even dropping. It was just a flat line and it's beautiful. But I was like, yeah, but I wasn't healthy at that moment. I was so sick and I got on Zofran they put me on it at 11 weeks because it was just such an extreme case with like, getting sick. But yeah, when it comes to dieting or not diet, but just like what I eat in a day, I just eat anything that I'm able to. Sometimes with pregnancy, you're like, oh, I can't eat meat anymore. Even though like I love meat, it's like didn't want meat, bread for sandwiches. I was like, nope, can't have bread. I can't smell the bread. So honestly, it's really funny. I call it the cookie diet. I was just able to eat cookies and keep them down. So I was on like this cookie and cracker diet and I was just making sure my blood sugars were, I bolused and just making sure like everything was, going well. You can eat whatever you want, but I always say it's also like moderation too.
Totally. Yes.
Yeah, you can eat literally cake, cookies, whatever, whatever you want, but it's moderation, making sure you're bolusing, making sure you're, if you do spike, correcting, and then getting back into your range. So yeah, but no diet.
Well, you hear that, folks. You can have cookies and crackers and still have a 5A1C. That's amazing. I love it.
Yeah, maybe not proud of it, but it works for you. You have to do what works for you. And
Yes.
with pregnancy, it's like, I hate to say it, but you're surviving. You need to survive.
Yes.
So Endo goes, you need to eat whatever you need to eat to just be able to eat.
How are the food aversions now? Is it getting better for you?
Oh, everything is like amazing now. The minute I got on Zofran, it really just changed my pregnancy. And I just feel like I was starting to be able to like eat my breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then my little snacks in between, rather than just eating things that wouldn't make me sick, which was like very minimal. So yeah, that helped me a lot. And now it's like trying to like keep that balance. Okay, do I have like my food groups? Am I making sure I have enough protein for me and my baby? But yeah, everything's going well. Growth is growing, going well as for the baby. And so far everything is healthy and great. So
That's awesome. So,
yeah.
is there anything you're nervous about, like for the remainder of your pregnancy in type 1?
Everyone is just saying, oh, insulin resistance. And I'm like, okay, but I haven't been there yet. I am as controlled as I can be. And you have to like, I feel like take each, maybe, I don't want to say obstacle, but each week at a time with pregnancy. But I feel like, I'm sure like most people, of course, delivery, you're just like, oh my gosh, my diet, and I'm going in it as I am controlling my diabetes and everything. Like I don't want anyone to touch it, anyone to try to control it.
Yes.
And I feel like, you hear some people that are like, oh, yeah, my hospital was great. They let me just deal with it all, especially with having the technology. And then you hear other people that are like, no, they're going to be giving you your medication, let's say this or that. And I was like, oh, that's not going to work well for me.
Especially because you know it way better than they do, guaranteed. So it's like, just
Yeah.
you should be
You
allowed.
exactly. But I told my husband, I'm like, listen, you're going to be with me the whole time. You know what I need when I need it. So for anything, you'll be my person.
Yes, exactly. If something happens, he can take over.
Yeah, you're my designated person in case, we need to do anything, while we're delivering. So
I have unfortunately heard that like day of delivery, just because of everything happening, hormones,
yeah.
everything, your blood sugar like goes sky high out of nowhere. That's what I've heard. And I'm like, oh no, that's pretty scary.
Yeah, it is. But you know what? My whole thing is that, and maybe this is part of like childhood trauma a little bit too, is that I'd rather be higher than lower. There's like nothing in the world because coming down from a high can take a little bit of time. and you feel more tired and lethargic. But like trying to, I feel like with low blood sugars, it's like survival mode. Even when I'm with like students and I'm just like, because it's just survival mode. And then my whole body's like, shaky inside, tingly. And I feel like it could take a long time to feel back to normal versus when you're high, you're like, okay, I'm coming down and I'll be okay. But when you're low, you're like, you have that thought process, I think, especially for me, where it's like, I can't pass out. I can't pass out. What if no one knows what to do around me? What if someone can't get to something or they give me the wrong thing? So that's my thought process on it,
I agree.
being
It's easier to
little.
function when you're high
Right, right.
than low.
So we'll see how it goes. Yeah, I feel like it's just now a new learning curve and, going through like another thing in life with diabetes.
Yes. Speaking of that, do you have any recommendations for somebody who's either wanting to become pregnant or maybe just found out they're pregnant just when
Yeah.
it type one?
There's amazing Facebook groups, and I think having support is everything, especially with living with type 1 diabetes. It's one of those things where I feel like people, of course, like you and anyone can do it alone, but I feel like it was like the diabetes community and finding people and buddies that have really helped me like become the person I am living with type 1 diabetes. Because there was always excuses like, oh, I can't do this, I have type 1 diabetes, or all this stuff. And then you see like these amazing people doing amazing things with type 1 and learning about all this technology. And knowledge is definitely power. But when it comes to like T1D and pregnancy, sometimes Facebook groups or groups in general, there's a lot of information out there. And a lot of people giving advice is just, no one should ever give anyone medical advice on the internet. So don't ever take it. And I always say, starting with having a conversation. It's so scary to just be like, okay, I want to start trying for a baby. Having that green light and your endo on board and getting everything lined up is just so important. So I think that's like the first like big step is lining up your ducks with your endo, making sure you're going in like a safe direction. And then of course you have, all the platforms to just learn more and learning about maybe experiences.
Yes, you want all the tools in your toolbox, your endo, your OBGYN, your friends, like everybody all in there to help you through the process.
Yeah, and it's crazy. The minute I started talking, but when it came, when we announced it that we were expecting a child, all like people that follow me and everything reached out. Oh my God, me too. What do you do? Here's what I'm doing. And there was so many of us where I had no idea that there was like a million of us pregnant at the same time living with type 1 diabetes. And it was honestly amazing because I felt even like I don't want to say alone, but it was just having that support. So I was like, hey, let's make a chat. Does anyone want to join? I'm going to call it the T1D Pregnancy Chat. This is like, it's insane. We have 100 type 1 pregnant women in my DMs right now in a chat group, and we talk every single day. And there's also some type 1s right now that are like, hey, I'm trying to conceive. We're in the process. Can I join the group? And I'm like, yeah, of course, because, you know, I didn't really know anyone to talk to when we were trying. It was just, being, you talk to your endo, your doctors and whatnot, but having a support system, especially for people maybe even like living more rural, like not living in a place where there's like, these meetup groups and everything. So yeah, there's 100 of us. We talk every day and we like support each other and we talk like literally about like everything T1D and pregnancy related.
That is absolutely amazing.
Yeah, it's like unreal. Like sometimes I'm like, how did this even happen?
Also funny you bring that up because for some reason I've also noticed on Instagram so many people that have type 1 are posting like
Yeah.
their pregnancy pictures and I'm like,
Oh
what is
yeah,
going on?
yeah. I had 3 friends that I've known for like over the years now, just diet buddies from like Instagram. And I'm like, oh my gosh, oh my God, like you're pregnant and you're pregnant and you're pregnant. And and I think it's like also cool to like be in a different age group being pregnant, especially with type 1 diabetes, Because I've had friends that had kids like in their 20s or married early, and I did everything later in life. So I was like, I'm going to be alone. All my friends' kids are all grown, like, older now. And I'm going to be like older with a baby and have no mom friends. And it's like, now it's like the opposite.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people are now older when they're having kids.
Yeah, yeah. So, I just like to be able to share my story and say, "Hey, diabetes is hard and no one is denying that, but we can do so much, We can be over 30 and having our first child with type 1 diabetes. And we can do like all this like crazy outdoor stuff with type 1 diabetes. It just makes you not, I don't want to say push the limits, but realize that like diabetes could be limiting in some things, but when you learn your body and like you also accept type 1 diabetes, I feel like there's like a weight that like lifts off your shoulders and you literally just do everything and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, I happen to have diabetes too.
Yes, yes, that was
Yes.
awesome.
Yeah,
So, how do people get in touch with you? What's your Instagram?
So on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, just at T1D Chick. Yep. So that's
Amazing.
where to find me if anyone has questions. And I try to be on like different platforms because you have like different demographics everywhere. Like I talk to people, like people will like message me that are like, 60 plus. And then you have like the teenagers that are like, oh, hey, where did you find like this pump accessory? Or, hey, how do you get your blood sugar on your watch? And it's like questions like that like I embrace because there was a time where I was that person that would message people and be like, "Oh my god, another person like me posting about type 1. Like this is amazing." Like because we aren't alone and there is a big network out there. You just have to like kind of find our diabetes online community.
Yes, thank goodness for social media. It has connected a lot of us
Yeah,
together all over the world.
it has. Yeah, I feel like social media could be a blessing or a curse, but for me, it was definitely like a blessing.
Yes, for sure. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for being here.
Of course, thank you for having me.
Yes, we loved hearing your story.
Thank you.